The dust motes danced in the slivers of weak morning light that pierced the grime-streaked windows, illuminating the swirling motes like tiny, forgotten galaxies. I watched them for a moment, my hand still gripping the chipped porcelain of the kitchen sink. Another day, another beginning. This apartment, with its high ceilings and peeling wallpaper, was supposed to be a fresh canvas. My old life, a canvas ruined, had been packed away, then scattered to the wind, leaving only the dull ache behind my ribs. I dragged a heavy box marked Essentials across the scuffed floorboards. The sound echoed in the cavernous, mostly empty rooms, each creak and groan of the old building magnified. This place had a history, I could feel it, a thick, almost viscous presence that clung to the air like the lingering scent of stale pipe smoke. It wasn't menacing, not yet, but it was there. A quiet observer, perhaps. I told myself it was just the usual melancholy of an old structure, the accumulated memories of countless previous occupants. Or maybe it was just my own baggage, projecting itself onto the new surroundings. My determination, a fragile thing, was propped up by the sheer necessity of survival. I had to make this work. A new city, an anonymous building, a chance to disappear and rebuild. The landlord, a man with tired eyes and a perpetually slumped posture, had simply handed me the keys with a weary sigh, muttering something about the place needing a bit of character. I suspected he meant a full renovation. I found the faded grandeur appealing, a mirror to my own bruised aesthetic. I spent the rest of the morning methodically unpacking, each item a small victory against the vast emptiness. Books, art supplies, a few threadbare blankets. The mundane ritual was a balm. Towards the bottom of a particularly heavy box, nestled beneath some old journals and a half-finished ceramic vase, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. It was a camera, not a sleek, modern digital device, but an antique, a heavy beast of black metal and polished chrome. The leather casing was worn smooth in places, the strap cracked. A faint, almost sweet smell of old chemicals and something else, something indefinable, clung to it. I traced the intricate engravings on the lens barrel. It was a beautiful object, a relic from a bygone era. I couldn't recall ever seeing it before. It must have been among the items my family had sent, a forgotten heirloom from a distant relative, swept up in the clearing out of my old life. A small shiver ran down my spine, but I dismissed it as the chill of the old apartment. I carefully lifted it out, the weight surprisingly comforting in my palm. The viewfinder was cloudy, but I could make out the faint outline of the room through it. A surge of unexpected inspiration pulsed through me. I hadn't touched a lens in months, had barely picked up a brush. The tragedy had stolen my focus, my drive. But this camera, this unexpected ghost from the past, felt different. It felt like a challenge, a small, tangible piece of a history I hadn't known I possessed. I found a roll of film, surprisingly, in a small leather pouch tucked inside the camera's worn case. Black and white, 36 exposures. Perfect. I loaded it, the click and whir of the mechanism, a surprisingly satisfying sound. The apartment offered plenty of subjects. I started with the kitchen, its chipped tiles and sun-drenched windowsill. Then the living room, the way the light fell across the bare floorboards, highlighting the dust. Each click of the shutter was a small act of defiance against the quiet despair that had threatened to consume me. Later that afternoon, needing a break from the confines of the apartment, I decided to explore the immediate neighborhood. The camera, now a familiar weight around my neck, felt like a companion. I wandered aimlessly down quiet side streets, past rows of identical brick houses, until I stumbled upon it. The empty swimming pool complex. It stood like a forgotten monument, a concrete leviathan brooding under the afternoon sun. The chain-link fence was rusted, twisted in places, and a faded sign, barely legible, warned of trespassers. The main entrance, a gaping maw of broken glass and splintered wood, beckoned with a strange, melancholic allure. I pushed through a weak section of the fence, the metal scraping a protest. Inside, the air was still and heavy, thick, with the scent of damp concrete and decay. The vast, empty basin of the main pool stretched out before me, a cracked, pale blue expanse where water once shimmered. Diving boards, stripped of their spring, jutted out like skeletal limbs. Graffiti, faded and peeling, adorned the walls, a testament to countless illicit visits. It was eerily beautiful, a testament to time's relentless march. I raised the camera, the viewfinder framing the desolate scene. Click. I took several more, capturing the decaying beauty of the complex. The quiet desolation of a place designed for joy, now given over to rust and ruin. I felt a strange sense of peace, a connection to the forgotten stories embedded in the concrete. This was the kind of raw, unflinching beauty I wanted to capture. This was a place where my art could breathe again. Back in the apartment, the light was fading, painting the walls in shades of bruised purple. I found an old, battered developing kit tucked away in the back of a cupboard. Another relic from the inherited box. The smell of fixer and developer, acrid but familiar, filled the small space. Finally, the negatives were dry. I held them up to the weak glow of the bare bulb. Then I came to the shots of the empty swimming pool complex. They were stark, beautiful in their bleakness. But on the fifth frame, the one I'd taken from the edge of the main pool, looking down into its concrete depths, something was different. I squinted, holding the negative closer. It was too defined, too deliberate. It looked like a figure stretched and elongated, a spectral distortion against the cracked concrete. Its form was indistinct, almost like a ripple in water, yet undeniably humanoid. I blinked, shook my head. It had to be a flaw in the film, a stray chemical stain, or perhaps just a trick of the light on the negative itself. My eyes were tired. I had spent too long in the dim bathroom. There had been no one, nothing. Just me and the echoing concrete. I stared at the image, trying to rationalize it away, but the vague, unsettling shape seemed to deepen, to solidify, mocking my attempts at logic. Mint, with its stale air and persistent scent of old wood, felt less like a fresh start and more like a waiting room. My grip on the chipped porcelain of the kitchen sink tightened, then relaxed. Another day, another beginning, yes, but this time I had a purpose, a small, mechanical curiosity clutched in my pocket. The vintage camera. The previous afternoon had been a blur of unpacking, and then the click of its shutter, a surprisingly satisfying sound. I'd walked through the empty rooms, the dust motes still dancing, and taken a few shots. Nothing special, just the peeling wallpaper, the cracked ceiling, the view from the window of the alley below. Now the anticipation gnawed at me. I needed to see what it saw. My makeshift darkroom was the smallest bathroom, sealed with black fabric over the window and door crack. The air in there was thick with the metallic tang of developing chemicals, a familiar scent from my art school days, now laced with something else, the faint, musty odor of the apartment itself, perhaps. I unwound the film from its spool, my fingers working by instinct in the absolute dark, the silence broken only by the slosh of the liquids in their trays. The first prints emerged, pale ghostly images blooming on the paper as it soaked in the developer. My breath hitched. The initial shots were exactly as I remembered. The empty living room, a stack of boxes, the sun-dappled alley. But then, as the fourth print began to solidify, I frowned. In the bottom corner, just where the floor met the wall, a smudge. I held it closer, rotating it under the dim red glow of the safe light. Dust on the lens, a light leak. I dismissed it, a minor imperfection. I continued, methodically dipping each sheet. The fifth print showed the kitchen, a stark, uninviting space. It wasn't the shadow of the fridge, nor of the counter. It was elongated, angular, like a person standing just out of frame, but no one had been there. My hand trembled slightly as I moved it to the stop bath. My mind raced, searching for rational explanations. The old building's eccentric lighting, a trick of the developing process. The next image, a close-up of the ancient gas stove, made my stomach clench. Across the grimy enamel, a faint, almost transparent distortion. It looked like a face, stretched and elongated, barely visible in the texture of the stove's surface. My first thought was pareidolia, the mind's tendency to see patterns where none exist. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, then reopened them. It was still there, a fleeting grimace, or was it a scream? The air in the tiny bathroom seemed to grow heavy, pushing against my chest. Later that afternoon, a colleague from my old gallery, a man named Marcus, dropped by. He was a practical sort, always quick with a sardonic remark. I tried to sound casual as I laid out the prints on the scarred kitchen table, careful to arrange them. The most unsettling ones weren't immediately obvious. "So the new place, huh?" he said, his gaze sweeping over the boxes and the general disarray. "Looks like you've got your work cut out for you." "Yeah," I mumbled, gesturing to the photos. "Just messing around with an old camera I found. Took some shots of the apartment." He picked up a few, nodding approvingly at the composition of a shot of the fire escape. "Decent. You've still got an eye, Kai," he squinted. "What's this, bad lighting?" I don't know, I said, trying to keep my voice even. It just appeared. And this one, I pointed to the distorted face on the stove. It's like something's in the photo that wasn't there. Marcus peered at it, then chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. Ah, the ghost in the machine, eh? Old cameras do that sometimes. Light leaks, dust on the lens, maybe the film was exposed to something, or I read just seeing things. Kai, I've always had an overactive imagination. It's part of my charm, makes for interesting art. He patted my shoulder. Don't sweat it. Just a faulty camera, or maybe I read just a little sensitive. After everything, his words, meant to reassure, felt like a slap. They pushed me further into a corner, my unease morphing into a quiet frustration. His dismissiveness, meant to ground me, had the opposite effect. It made the strange images feel more real, more personal. If no one else saw it, was it only for me? The air outside felt thick and humid. I needed to move, to clear my head, to prove to myself that the anomalies were just that, anomalies, confined to the apartment and the camera's quirks. I grabbed my coat and the camera, a strange compulsion guiding my steps. I walked for a long time, the city's hum a dull thrum against my ears, until I found myself at the edge of the forgotten side of town. The empty swimming pool complex loomed, a concrete skeleton against the bruised sky. Locals knew it as a place of faded glory, left to decay after a long-forgotten incident. The chain-link fence was torn, inviting trespass. I slipped through, the metallic clang echoing in the stillness. Inside, the vast, roofless structure was a symphony of decay. Cracked tiles lined the empty basins, stained with algae and rust. The air here was heavy, damp, carrying the faint, lingering scent of chlorine and wet concrete, even after all these years. My footsteps echoed, swallowed by the cavernous space. I raised the camera, the cold metal a comfort against my palm. I took a few shots, the empty main pool, the skeletal high dive, the decaying changing rooms. The click of the shutter felt like a whisper in the echoing silence. I wasn't trained to capture anything specific, just the raw, desolate beauty of ruin. But as I stood by the edge of the deepest pool, staring down into its green-tinged depths, a shiver traced its way up my spine. My breath plumed faintly. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to leave, but my feet felt rooted. Back in the apartment, the photos from the complex lay drying. The first few were as expected, beautiful, haunting images of urban decay. Then I saw it. The last shot, the one I'd taken looking down into the deep end of the empty pool. A faint, shimmering outline like a heat haze, but too defined, too purposeful, seemed to hover just above the concrete floor of the basin. And within that haze, a suggestion of movement, a distorted form, as if struggling against an invisible current. My rationalizations shattered. This wasn't dust. This wasn't light. This wasn't my imagination. The camera had captured something that shouldn't be there, something horrifyingly real, and it had followed me home. Marcus's laughter still echoed in my ears, a dry, abrasive sound that chafed against the raw conviction clawing at my gut. Overactive imagination. He'd said it with such casual certainty, as if my own eyes were incapable of processing simple light and shadow. But I knew what I saw. The image wasn't a smudge, wasn't a trick of the light. It was a face, indistinct but undeniably there, a shadow with a hint of something more, lurking in the corner of my living room where no one had stood. I clutched the photograph tighter, the glossy paper warm against my palm. The dismissal stung, but it also hardened my resolve. If no one else would believe me, I would find the truth myself. I couldn't ignore it. Not after what I'd been through. Not after moving into this place to escape. This wasn't some phantom limb of grief. This was something new, something other. The camera sat on my drafting table, an antique behemoth of metal and leather, its lens staring blankly at the wall. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It was an old model, heavy and intricate. The brand name, etched elegantly into the side, was faded but still legible. Viridian. A quick search on my laptop brought up sparse results. A defunct German company, known for its sturdy, if somewhat quirky, cameras in the early 20th century. Forums dedicated to vintage photography were a goldmine of information, detailing specific models, common quirks, and even serial number ranges. Mine, a Viridian 35mm, seemed to be from the late 1930s. There were no mentions of cameras that captured the unseen, no ghost in the machine anecdotes. Frustration simmered, but I pushed past it. If the camera wasn't inherently supernatural, then its connection had to be external, to the apartment, to its history. I shifted my focus, typing Viridian 35mm camera apartment building history into the search bar. Nothing specific. I tried local apartment building history and my address. The building was old, built in the 1920s, originally luxury flats that had since been subdivided and seen better days. A few dry historical articles, a brief mention in a local architecture blog. Nothing sinister. Then, a buried link caught my eye, an archived online newspaper article from the local historical society, dated 1957. The headline was innocuous enough: "Building Renovations Unearth Time Capsule." I clicked. The article described workers discovering a small, sealed metal box behind a wall during a renovation project in this very building. Inside, among other trinkets, was a Viridian 35mm camera. My breath hitched. The article went on to describe the contents of the time capsule as belonging to a young woman named Alara, who had lived in the building decades prior. The tone was light, almost celebratory. The article mentioned that Alara had vanished without a trace in 1948, just after the war. Her disappearance had been a minor local mystery, eventually fading into obscurity. The article concluded by saying the items were donated to the Historical Society, but the camera, deemed less historically significant, was eventually sold off in a charity auction years later. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through more archived articles, searching for Alara's name for the year 1948. The initial reports were brief, almost dismissive: a missing person presumed to have left town. But then a series of follow-up pieces, increasingly desperate in tone, a neighbor's interview expressing concern. My gaze drifted to the camera on the table, then to the photograph in my hand. Alara vanished. Her camera, found years later, now in my possession, capturing images of a presence I couldn't see. A thread, thin but undeniable, began to weave itself through the decades. I needed air. I needed to think. I grabbed my jacket, the camera's weight feeling almost accusatory on the table, and walked out into the cool evening. My feet eventually led me to the edge of town, to a place I'd only seen from the outside, the empty swimming pool complex. The chain-link fence, rusted and sagging, offered little resistance. I slipped through a gap and stepped onto cracked concrete. The air here was heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay, a stark contrast to the faint scent of old dust and plaster that permeated my apartment. The main building, a skeletal structure of peeling paint and shattered windows, loomed under the bruised twilight sky. The diving boards, once symbols of exhilarating heights, now jutted out like broken limbs, reaching towards a sky that felt too distant. My breath plumed in the cold air. The silence was profound, broken only by the scuttling of unseen things in the shadows. This place, once vibrant with laughter and splashing, was now a tomb of echoes. I pulled out my phone, still frantically scrolling through the archived articles. I found a small, almost throwaway line in one of the older pieces about Alara's disappearance. A young boy had claimed to see her walking towards the old community pool on the evening she vanished. The police had dismissed it. No evidence, nothing to suggest foul play. But here, in this echoing cavern of forgotten joy, the detail resonated like a struck bell. I looked around the empty swimming pool complex, the vast space amplifying my unease. Was it just my imagination, fueled by the unsettling discoveries, or was there something else here, something lingering? My head snapped up, my eyes darting into the deepening gloom. Nothing, just the wind, perhaps, rustling through the dead leaves, but I felt it. The camera back in my apartment wasn't broken. It wasn't faulty. It was a window. A terrible, horrifying window into a past that was not content to remain buried. Alara's past. And somehow, through that ancient lens, it was reaching into mine. The implications settled over me like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. The mystery was deepening, yes, but it was also closing in. The image wasn't a trick of light. It was a face, distorted and in pain, captured in the corner of a photograph I'd taken of my own empty living room. My hands had trembled as I'd set the camera down, the cold metal a sudden weight. Marcus could dismiss it, but he hadn't looked through the lens. He hadn't felt the static prickle on his skin. Back in the apartment, the silence felt heavier than usual. It pressed in, muffling the distant city sounds, making the creaks of the old building seem impossibly loud. I tried to sketch, to lose myself in the familiar comfort of charcoal on paper, but my hand hovered, useless. It was like dry leaves skittering across pavement, or a forgotten radio station tuning in then out. I froze, my breath catching. Nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator. My imagination, Marcus had said. I tried to convince myself. My nerves were frayed. The old building settled. But then a sudden, sharp drop in temperature hit me, centered directly behind my left shoulder. It wasn't a draft from the window. The air in front of me remained still and stale. I spun around, my heart racing. The air shimmered for a fraction of a second, a distortion like heat haze over asphalt, then vanished. Later, I was making tea, the kettle whistling a shrill, innocent tune. I'd placed my favorite ceramic mug on the counter. I turned to fetch the tea bags from the cupboard. When I turned back, the mug was gone. My eyes scoured the counter, then the floor. It wasn't there. A knot tightened in my stomach. I knew I hadn't moved it. Then, from the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement near the open doorway to the living room. My breath hitched. The mug, I realized, was now sitting on the edge of the kitchen table, a place I hadn't put it. Its handle faced away from me. The apartment began to feel less like a home and more like a cage. I'd wake in the dead of night, convinced I wasn't alone, the air thick with an unspoken accusation. I stopped sleeping in my bed, opting for the couch, hoping a change of scenery might break the spell. It didn't. I couldn't stay. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air too thin to breathe. I needed to escape, to clear my head, to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it. My gaze fell on the camera, sitting innocently on the mantelpiece. An impulse, sharp and undeniable, pulled me towards it. I picked it up, the familiar weight strangely comforting, then unsettling. I found myself leaving the apartment. The camera clutched tight, drawn by a desperate need for answers, or perhaps just a change of scenery. I ended up at the old, empty swimming pool complex on the edge of town. I remembered driving past it years ago, a relic from a different era, its windows boarded, its gates rusted shut. Now, a section of the fence had collapsed, offering an illicit entry. The air inside was thick with the scent of damp concrete and decay, a ghost of chlorine lingering on the tongue. My footsteps echoed unnervingly in the vast, cavernous space. The main pool, a gaping rectangle of cracked tiles, lay dry and silent, a colossal blue wound. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light, piercing the grimy skylights, illuminating the peeling paint on the high walls. I walked to the edge of the deep end, my voice swallowed by the sheer scale of the place. I raised the camera, aiming it at the empty pool, at the diving boards that jutted out like skeletal fingers. The lens felt warm against my palm. A sudden, violent gust of wind tore through the complex, though no windows were open. It slammed a rusty metal door on the far side of the building with a deafening clang that reverberated through the concrete. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. Looked down. My hand, still holding the camera, trembled. I didn't want to. I truly didn't want to. But an invisible force seemed to tilt my head, forcing my gaze downwards, into the dry, tiled basin of the empty pool. There, etched into the grime on the lowest tile of the deep end, was a single, undeniable word: help. I cried out, stumbling backward, dropping the camera. It clattered against the concrete, the lens cracking with a sickening crunch. The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable malevolence. I felt a distinct push on my back, propelling me forward, towards the edge of the deep end. My feet scrambled for purchase on the slick concrete. My arms flailing, I was falling. I caught myself just in time, my hands scraping against the rough edge, my grip tight. The entity wasn't just observing anymore. It was here with me in the flesh, or something akin to it. It wanted me in that pool. My breath hitched, ragged and shallow. This wasn't just a haunting, it was a direct confrontation. The apartment wasn't a prison because it contained the entity. It was a prison because the entity could follow me, could reach me anywhere. There was no escape. The single word, take, etched into the grimy tile of the empty swimming pool complex, seemed to throb with a dull, malevolent light. My hand, still clamped around the vintage camera, felt like it was fused to the cold metal. My fingers had gone numb, yet the tremor that ran through my arm was violent, almost convulsive. The air, already thick with the smell of stagnant water and damp concrete, now tasted like dust and something metallic, like old blood. I wanted to scream, to run, to smash the camera against the tiled wall until it shattered into 1,000 useless pieces. But my feet were rooted. My gaze remained fixed on that awful word, a silent, chilling command from a source I couldn't comprehend, yet felt undeniably present. A shiver, sharp and sudden, clawed its way up my spine. It wasn't just the chill of the cavernous complex. It was the cold dread that seeped into my bones, telling me I wasn't alone. I could feel eyes on me, not human eyes, but something ancient and predatory. The camera vibrated faintly in my grip, a low hum that seemed to resonate with my racing pulse. When I finally managed to tear my gaze away, my breath hitched. The camera's lens, reflecting the dim light from a grimy window high above, seemed to wink. It was a trick of the light, I told myself, a symptom of my frayed nerves. But the thought didn't soothe me. It only fueled the desperate, clawing need to escape. I stumbled backwards, my movements clumsy, my mind a frantic scramble of fear and a burgeoning, terrible understanding. The entity, whatever it was, knew I was here, and it wanted something. I didn't remember the walk back to the apartment. Fragments of it played in my mind like a broken film reel. The biting wind, the sound of my own ragged breathing, the camera still clutched in my hand like a lifeline or a curse. Once inside, I slammed the door, the sound echoing through the unnervingly quiet rooms. The apartment felt different now, not just old and dusty, but imbued with a presence, a watchful stillness that prickled my skin. My phone felt like a foreign object in my trembling hand. I stared at the contact list, my thumb hovering. A dismissive friend wouldn't understand. The police would laugh, but there had to be someone. My finger finally landed on a number I'd seen on a local community board, paranormal investigations and historical anomalies. The listing had seemed quaint, even silly when I first noticed it. Now it felt like my only hope. The voice on the other end was gravelly, cautious. I tried to explain, my words tumbling out in a breathless rush, disjointed and probably incoherent. I spoke of the apartment, the camera, the impossible images, the word in the empty swimming pool complex. An hour stretched into an eternity. I paced, I sat, I stared at the camera resting on the worn wooden table, a silent, malevolent sentinel. When the knock finally came, it was soft, hesitant. I practically leaped to the door. They carried a battered leather satchel. Their eyes, when they met mine, were shrewd, observant, but held a weariness that spoke of too many late nights and too many strange stories. "Kai?" they asked, their voice low. I nodded, stepping aside. The investigator moved through my apartment with a practiced ease, their gaze sweeping over the inherited furniture, the half-finished canvases, the general disarray of my life. They didn't comment. They simply opened their satchel, pulling out a small, boxy device with a flickering screen and a telescoping antenna. "This is an EMF meter," they explained, their voice flat. "Measures electromagnetic fields. Sometimes high readings can indicate an energetic presence." They walked slowly, methodically through the living room into the kitchen, then the bedroom. The device remained silent, its screen stubbornly blank. My heart sank, but they are real. They picked up the camera, turning it over in their hands, their brow furrowed. An old model, nice craftsmanship. They didn't seem particularly impressed. I pulled out the stack of developed photos, laying them on the table, or a faulty lens creating aberrations. "No," I insisted, my voice cracking. "I took them. I saw nothing when I pressed the shutter." They set the photos down, then pulled out another device, this one with a lens like a small handheld thermal camera. They didn't believe me. They thought I was delusional or playing some elaborate trick. "Please," I pleaded, my voice hoarse. "You have to understand, it's real. It spoke to me, it's here." Just as the investigator was about to offer a dismissive platitude, a low, guttural growl vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't a human sound, nor an animal one. It was deeper, older, like the earth itself groaning in pain. The EMF meter, which had been silent, suddenly shrieked, its screen flashing an angry, violent red. The small, flickering screen on the thermal camera went entirely black for a split second, then rebooted, displaying only static. The investigator froze, their head snapping up. Their eyes, previously weary, were now wide. Startled, they looked at me, then at the camera, then back at me, a new, unsettling understanding dawning in their eyes. Before I could answer, the growl came again, closer this time, seeming to emanate from the very walls. The apartment lights flickered wildly, threatening to die. The camera on the table began to hum, a resonant thrumming that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. The investigator quickly gathered their equipment, stuffing it back into the satchel with fumbling hands. I think I've seen enough," they stammered, backing towards the door. Their face was pale, their usual composure shattered. You should get out of here, Kai, immediately." They practically bolted from the apartment, leaving the door ajar. The lights steadied. The camera's hum subsided. The sickly sweet smell dissipated. I slowly walked to the door and closed it, the click of the latch echoing in the sudden, profound stillness. They were gone. I was alone again. My help had not only failed, it had provoked it. My gaze fell to the table. The investigator, in their haste, had left something behind, a small, flat black device like a voice recorder. It lay next to the stack of photos, its tiny red light blinking, and next to that, a single, newly developed photograph. It hadn't been there a moment ago. I picked it up, my fingers shaking uncontrollably. It was a picture of my living room, taken from the perspective of the doorway. But in the background, just behind where the investigator had stood, was a shimmering, almost transparent outline. A face. Distorted, ancient, its features stretched in a silent, predatory grin. The red light on the abandoned recorder winked. It was still recording. I pressed play, my breath catching in my throat. A wave of static, then the growl I had just heard, clear and terrifying. The door clicked shut, the sound echoing through the sudden, hollow quiet of my apartment. The growls had ceased. The lights had steadied, their usual sickly yellow glow returning. The cloying sweetness in the air had thinned, leaving only the stale scent of old wood and dust. My colleagues, frantic with a terror I still couldn't fully process, were gone. They hadn't seen what I had, not really. They hadn't seen the fleeting glimpse of a face in the developing image, a face that was both familiar and utterly alien, twisted in silent agony. I moved slowly, drawn by an awful magnetism, to the small table where the camera lay. It was inert now, its polished brass casing cool to the touch. The lens seemed to stare back at me, a single, unblinking eye. I picked it up, its weight solid and familiar in my hand. It was the anchor to this nightmare, the conduit. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos. The entity wasn't just a random haunting. It wasn't just a lingering echo. It was active. It was responding. And it was reacting to me. The way it had amplified its presence, the way the growls had seemed to vibrate in my very bones, it felt personal. It felt like a deliberate act. I needed to understand the rules. Every ghost story, every urban legend had them. A weakness, a trigger, a reason. I spread out the collection of old photographs I'd found with the camera, the ones that predated my arrival. Faded sepia prints of families, street scenes, even a few portraits of children with unnervingly blank stares. One particular photograph, a grainy black and white shot of a group of swimmers by a pool, kept drawing my eye. It wasn't just the unsettling blankness in their eyes, mirroring those of the children in the older prints. It was the faint, almost imperceptible inscription on the back, scrawled in faded ink, "The Last Dive, May 37, and below it, a partial address, mostly illegible, but with a clear street name that was eerily familiar. My street. A jolt of icy comprehension shot through me. The tragedy wasn't just around the apartment, it was in it. And the camera wasn't just capturing the past, it was a key. What if the entity wasn't trapped by the camera, but within it, or perhaps released by it? What if taking photos wasn't documenting a haunting, but feeding it? And what if it specifically wanted me to keep taking them? My gaze fell upon a crumpled newspaper clipping I'd found tucked away in a drawer, detailing the mysterious drowning of a young man, a promising swimmer, at the local municipal pool in the late 1930s. The article spoke of strange circumstances, a facility plagued by a series of misfortunes leading up to its closure. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying inevitability. The address on the photo, the newspaper clipping, the date. The empty swimming pool complex. It was still there, a derelict monument to a forgotten history, just a few blocks from my apartment. I had to go. The entity was growing bolder, more powerful. If I didn't understand it, it would consume me. The short walk to the empty swimming pool complex felt like traversing miles. The building loomed, a skeletal frame of cracked concrete and grimy glass, its once grand entrance boarded up with weathered planks. A gaping hole in the chain-link fence offered an invitation I couldn't refuse. Inside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of debris under my boots. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and stagnant water, even though the pools themselves were dry. The main pool hall was a cavernous space, light filtering weakly through the dirt-streaked skylights, illuminating dust motes dancing in the gloom. The Olympic-sized pool gaped below, a vast, empty concrete basin, scarred with cracks and peeling paint. I pulled out the camera, the familiar weight a comfort and a curse. I raised it, pointing it at the deep end, where a rusted ladder descended into nothingness. I pressed the shutter. The The camera whirred, its internal mechanism groaning. Then a low, guttural moan echoed from the deep end of the empty pool. It wasn't a human sound. It was deeper, wetter, like water churning in a constricted throat. My breath hitched, visible in the frigid air. Then I saw it. Not a full figure, not a solid form, but a shimmering distortion in the air, a ripple in reality itself, directly above the rusted ladder. It was like looking through heat haze, but instead of blurring, it solidified, coalescing into something vaguely humanoid. Its head was indistinct, but two pinpricks of light like distant phosphorescence appeared where eyes should be, fixed on me. A tendril, not quite an arm, not quite a limb, but something fluid and sinuous, slowly extended from the mass, dripping blackness onto the cracked concrete floor of the empty pool. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, stretching towards me, towards the camera in my hands. See me. The words were like pebbles tumbling through water, disjointed and ancient. It wanted to be seen. It craved recognition. And the camera was how it manifested. It wasn't trapped by the camera, it was activated by it. Each photograph I took was a step towards its full return, each flash a pulse of energy it consumed. And it was targeting me because I was the one holding the key, the one bringing it back. I stumbled back, my foot catching on a loose piece of tile. The camera slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the ground, its lens pointed uselessly at the ceiling. The entity froze, the shimmering form wavering, its phosphorescent eyes still locked on me. The outstretched arm retracted slowly, folding back into the churning mass. It needed the camera, that was the rule, and now I knew its hunger. Its true power wasn't just to appear, but to drain, to consume, to manifest through the very act of capturing its image. I had not just been taking pictures of a ghost, I had been feeding a predator, and it had finally shown me its true, terrifying form. The words still echoed, not in my ears, but in the hollow spaces behind my eyes. It wants to be seen. It craved recognition. The camera, not a prison, but a key. Each flash, a turning of that key. I'd been so blind, so eager to chase the fleeting glimpse of something extraordinary, that I hadn't seen the gaping more opening wider with every click. My apartment, once a sanctuary of nascent hope, now felt like a stage set for a final, terrible act. Dust motes danced in the slivers of afternoon light that pierced the grimy windows, each particle a silent witness to my unraveling. I paced, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight, a counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of my own thoughts. The camera sat on the workbench, an innocuous black box, yet pulsing with an unseen malignancy. Destroy it. That was the first, most visceral impulse. Smash it to pieces, scatter its dark heart. But what if that wasn't enough? If it was activated by the camera? What would happen if the conduit shattered before the entity was truly gone? Would it simply be freed, unbound, left to wander, or worse, to latch onto something, someone else? No, that wasn't a solution. That was a surrender. It needed to be laid to rest or banished. Or perhaps, in some twisted way, given the recognition it craved, but on my terms, not its own. My gaze fell on the tattered newspaper clippings I'd found spread across the table. That was it. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The camera activated it, but the location was its anchor. It wasn't just about the device. It was about the place, the lingering resonance of loss and despair. To truly sever the connection, to banish it, I had to bring the camera back to where its story began. I had to confront it at the source. Dangerous, reckless, potentially fatal. But there was no other way. I could feel its influence growing, the edges of my perception fraying. My own reflection in the mirror seemed to shift, the eyes too wide, too haunted. I was already losing ground. This had to end. I began to gather my things, not much. The camera, of course. I wrapped it carefully in an old canvas cloth, as if protecting a newborn or perhaps containing a volatile bomb. A heavy, rusted wrench from my toolbox, crude but effective. I needed something decisive, something that would not merely break, but shatter. A flashlight, its beam weak and uncertain, but better than nothing. Then a small, significant item, a photograph, a picture of me and my sister, laughing, sunlight bright on our faces before everything changed. A tangible piece of what I was fighting for, a tether to the life I still clung to, a reminder of the preciousness of human connection. I tucked it into my pocket, its edges soft with age. I felt a strange calm settle over me, a resolve born of desperation. The fear was still there, a knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a grim determination. I accepted the consequences. I knew this might be my last walk out of this apartment, my last breath of fresh air. The entity wanted to be seen, to be recognized. I would give it that, but it would be a final, blinding flash of recognition, a moment of confrontation that would either destroy it or destroy me. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. Each creak of the building, each distant siren seemed amplified, imbued with a sinister meaning. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled on my worn jacket, but my gaze was steady. One last look around the apartment, at the half-finished canvases, the scattered sketches, the life I might be leaving behind. Then I opened the door, stepping into the deepening twilight. The air was cool, carrying the faint, metallic tang of an approaching storm. It knew it was waiting, and I was walking directly into its embrace, ready to tear myself free or be consumed entirely. The empty swimming pool complex awaited. I'd been so blind, so eager to chase the fleeting glimpse of something extraordinary that I hadn't seen the truth until now. My breath plumed in the frigid air of the apartment, each exhalation a ghost. The thermostat was useless. The cold wasn't merely atmospheric. It was an extension of the presence that now throbbed in the very plaster of the walls, a low hum of malevolence that vibrated through the soles of my feet. Dust motes danced in its weak glow like frantic, tiny spirits. The air tasted of rust and something else, something cloying and ancient, like wet earth disturbed from a deep slumber. My hands, despite their tremor, were steady as I adjusted the focus, aiming it not at a wall, not at a corner, but at the empty space directly in front of me. It was there, I knew it. A ripple in the air, a faint scent of chlorine, almost imperceptible. My plan was simple, born of desperation and a sudden, terrifying clarity. The entity wanted to be seen, but not by me. It wanted to be seen for what it was, to confront its own truth. And the camera, which had captured its fleeting, distorted images, would now be its mirror. I had spent the last hours gathering every scrap of information, every newspaper clipping, every faded photograph I could find in the apartment's hidden nooks. The tragedy, the forgotten children, the place, a polished mirror, almost perfectly round, secured where the film normally lay. The flashbulb was fresh, primed for its final, blinding burst. My finger hovered over the shutter release. The air grew heavy, pressing down on my chest. A low groan, like wood straining under immense pressure, emanated from the floorboards. The hum intensified, becoming a low, guttural growl that resonated inside my skull. I could feel its anger, a tangible wave of pure, unadulterated rage washing over me, trying to break my resolve, to make me drop the camera and flee. No, don't. My vision blurred at the edges, the apartment walls seeming to melt and reform, showing fleeting glimpses of damp, green tiles and murky water. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, gripping the camera's body, grounding myself. This was it, its full power. It was trying to show me its horror, to drown me in it, but I wouldn't let it. I opened my eyes, my gaze fixed on the empty space. The chlorine scent was overpowering now, burning my nostrils. The air solidified, and for a terrifying instant I saw it. It was reaching, its hand translucent, shimmering. A child, one of them. And then, with a horrifying jolt, I understood the true extent of the tragedy. Not just a drowning, but a cover-up. The neglect, the forgotten details, it was all there, impressed upon the very fabric of this place. The entity wasn't just a victim, it was the embodiment of the injustice, the lingering, unacknowledged horror. It wasn't seeking revenge, not truly. It was seeking witness. Flash. The apartment exploded in a searing, brilliant white light. For a microsecond, the entire room was bathed in an impassable, pure illumination. The entity, caught in that blinding glare, recoiled. Its form, which had been solidifying, now seemed to ripple and distort, as if caught in a violent current. The flash wasn't just light, it was a concentrated burst of energy, a moment of pure, unadulterated reflection, and in that reflection the entity saw itself, not as a vengeful spirit, but as it was in its final moments. It saw the fear, the abandonment, the moment of its own undoing, the place where it all ended, the truth. A shriek, raw and despairing, tore through the apartment. It was not a sound of anger, but of profound, agonizing sorrow. The cloying scent dissipated. My hands were still clenched around the camera. I stumbled backwards, my legs weak, and collapsed onto the dusty floor. The camera, still attached to the tripod, teetered, then fell with a dull thud. Nothing. Only the frantic thrum of my own pulse. I lay there for a long time, shivering, my body aching as if I'd been beaten. When my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I could just make out the camera lying on its side. Its lens was cracked. The flash mechanism was a tangled mess of wires and scorched plastic. It was broken, truly broken. The immediate threat was gone. The apartment was just an apartment again, old and dusty, but free of the suffocating presence. Yet I was not free. The images, the sounds, the overwhelming despair of that entity's final moments, they were burned into my mind. I had seen it. I had witnessed its truth, and that truth had left an indelible mark. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. I had survived. I had banished it. But the ghost of that empty swimming pool complex and the terrible injustice it represented would forever echo in the quiet corners of my memory. True peace, I realized, might never be found. Not after seeing such a thing. Not after knowing. I was changed, scarred, and forever bound to the spectral echoes of a forgotten tragedy.